The moment I picked up that microphone, the whole room went quiet. Not the soft, romantic quiet of a wedding. The kind of quiet where people stop breathing because they can feel that something is about to happen and they do not want to miss a single word. My parents were standing near the back of the room. My mother had her hand pressed to her mouth. My father looked like he wanted to disappear through the floor. And standing there in my wedding dress with the microphone in my hand and 300 people watching me, I finally understood something I had spent 29 years trying to avoid. The truth does not wait forever. Eventually, it finds a way to speak, even if you have to be the one who decides to say it out loud. This is the story of how the most important day of my life became the day my family showed me exactly who they were, and how I stopped pretending that I did not see it. Before we go any further, I want to ask you something. Think about a moment in your life when someone you loved put themselves at the center of your most important day. Think about whether you stayed quiet about it or whether you finally said something. Because what Emily did with that microphone was not something she planned. It was something that had been building for years. And I think a lot of you are going to recognize exactly what she was carrying before she ever reached that stage. Stay with this one. It earns it. My name is Emily, and I want to tell you about the day I got married. Not the romantic parts, not the flowers or the music or the way Daniel looked at me when I walked down the aisle. Those things were real and they were beautiful, and I will carry them with me for the rest of my life. But that is not why you are here. You are here because something happened at that wedding that I have never fully talked about until now. Something that had been coming for a long time, and something that finally forced me to choose between keeping the peace one more time and actually telling the truth. I am going to tell you all of it. Let me start not at the wedding, but at the beginning, because the beginning matters. You cannot understand the microphone moment without understanding the years that came before it. I grew up as the middle child in a family of 5. I have an older brother named Marcus and a younger sister named Claire. My parents, Raymond and Diane, were not cruel people. I want to be clear about that. They were not people who set out to hurt their children. But they were people who had very strong ideas about what their family should look like from the outside and very little patience for anything that complicated that picture. Marcus was the one who got the praise. He was good at school, good at sports, charming with adults. Every dinner conversation seemed to circle back to something Marcus had done or said or achieved. Claire was the youngest, and she had learned early how to cry in exactly the right way to make our mother rush in and fix everything for her. Between them, in the middle, was me. I was the quiet one, the responsible one, the one who got good grades without anyone really noticing, the one who cleaned up without being asked, the one who remembered birthdays, organized family photos, drove people to appointments, and never caused a problem. I was useful. But useful and celebrated are two very different things, and in our house, I was only ever the first one. I learned early that my job in this family was to hold things together and not take up too much space doing it. I was the bridge when Marcus and my father argued. I was the person who called to check on my mother when she was having a hard week. I was the one who made sure family events went smoothly and that nobody had to feel uncomfortable. I carried that role for so long that I stopped noticing how heavy it was. It just felt like who I was. By the time I was in my mid-20s, I had a good life outside of that family dynamic. I had built something real. I had worked hard, gotten a degree in communications, built a career managing client accounts for a mid-sized marketing firm, and found a group of friends who actually saw me. Real friends. The kind who ask how you are and then actually listen to the answer. And then I met Daniel. Daniel came into my life through a mutual friend at a birthday dinner. He was the kind of person who remembered the small details. He remembered that I mentioned I liked a particular type of tea in the first conversation we ever had, and 3 weeks later he showed up to our second date with a small box of it, totally casual, like it was nothing. But it was not nothing to me. It was someone actually paying attention. It was someone filing away what I said and treating it like it mattered. We dated for almost 2 years before he proposed. By the time he got down on one knee, I already knew the answer. I had known it for a long time. The engagement was one of the happiest periods of my adult life. Daniel's family. Why welcomed me in a way that felt almost overwhelming at first because I was not used to it. His mother, a warm woman named Rosalind, hugged me at our first family dinner like she had been waiting to meet me. His father, Thomas, was quiet and kind and made thoughtful observations that made you feel heard. Daniel had a younger brother, Ethan, and a sister-in-law named Patricia, who became one of my favorite people within the first few months of knowing her. They were loud in a good way. They argued and laughed and pushed back on each other, and then sat together at the table for 3 hours after the food was gone just because nobody wanted to leave. It was a completely different kind of family than the one I grew up in. My own family's reaction to the engagement was more complicated. My parents were polite about it. There was no dramatic scene. My mother said the ring was lovely. My father shook Daniel's hand and said he seemed like a good man. Marcus gave a short toast at the small family dinner we had to celebrate and made it mostly about himself, which was so on brand that I barely registered it. Claire posted a photo from the night on social media with a caption about how excited she was to be a bridesmaid, even though I had not asked her yet. That was the first sign, small but there. I should tell you that I noticed these things. I am not someone who misses details. I noticed that my parents' congratulations felt measured. I noticed that my mother's first question after seeing the ring was not about how I felt, but about where Daniel's family was from and what his father did for work. I noticed that my father's first concern about the engagement was about timing and whether we had thought about the financial commitment seriously enough. I noticed all of it. And I did what I had spent a lifetime doing. I filed it away and kept smiling and kept holding everything together. We started planning the wedding about 18 months before the date. This is where things began to shift in ways I could not ignore. Daniel and I had a clear vision. We wanted something intimate but beautiful. 300 guests, which felt like a compromise since his family was large and warm and my parents insisted that certain people had to be invited. We chose a venue in the countryside, a converted old estate with stone walls and sprawling gardens, and a reception hall with high wooden ceilings. It was stunning. It was exactly what we had both dreamed of. We put down a substantial deposit and began the real work. From the very beginning, my mother had opinions. Not suggestions. Opinions. There is a difference. A suggestion sounds like, "Have you thought about this?" An opinion from my mother sounded like, "Well, that is not really what people do, and I am not sure that is appropriate, and I think you should reconsider because of what people will think." She had opinions about the flowers. She had opinions about the seating chart. She had opinions about the catering, the music, the timing of the ceremony, the length of the reception, the invitation design, and the font that was used on the invitations. Every phone call about the wedding became a negotiation. Every decision Daniel and I made together became something my mother felt she had equal standing to revise. I tried to involve her where I could. I took her to venue visits. I brought her along to cake tastings. I asked her opinion on dress silhouettes even though I already knew what I wanted. I did these things because I thought they would make her feel included. I thought if she felt like she was part of the process, she would ease up on the pressure. I was wrong. Involving her did not reduce the pressure. It only gave her more access points. My father's involvement was different but equally exhausting. Raymond had decided, without asking, that he would be delivering a speech at the reception. Not just a toast. A full speech. He had mentioned it in passing during a phone call, and I had not confirmed it, but he had taken the silence as agreement and had apparently been preparing remarks for months. I found this out not from him, but from my Aunt Carol, who told me at a family barbecue that my father had been working on his speech and was very excited about it. I called my father that evening and gently brought it up. I told him Daniel and I had planned the reception program already. There were specific speeches arranged. There was a timeline. I asked him, as kindly as I could, whether we could talk about it and find a way to include a short moment for him. His response was cool. He told me that he was the father of the bride and that a speech was customary and expected, and that he did not see why this needed to be a conversation. Then he changed the subject. I let it go. I always let it go. The bridesmaids were another chapter entirely. I had chosen 3 women for my bridal party. My closest friend from college, Vera, who had been my person through every difficult season of adult L. Ife, Patricia, Daniel's sister-in-law, because she had quickly become someone I trusted and loved. And my childhood friend, Nadia, who had known me since we were 8 years old and who was one of the most grounded, genuine people I had ever met. I had not chosen Claire. This was a decision I had thought about carefully and honestly. Claire and I did not have a bad relationship, but we were not close. We never had been. Claire's personality was high maintenance in ways that tended to make stressful situations more stressful. She was competitive about attention in a quiet but persistent way that I had learned to manage at family events by keeping my distance. I had not built the kind of friendship with her that I had with Vera or Nadia. And I wanted my bridal party to feel like a circle of women who genuinely knew me and had genuinely been there. When I told my mother about the bridal party choices, she went very quiet on the phone. Then she said Claire must be very hurt. I told her I understood that, and I was sorry if Claire felt left out, but that these were my closest people. My mother said it would look bad to the extended family. She said Claire would never forget this. She said she hoped I had thought about what this meant for the family going forward. I told her I had thought about it very carefully. The silence on the other end of the phone was the kind my mother had been using my whole life. The pointed, heavy kind that communicates disappointment without having to say the word. I had learned to carry that silence without cracking, but that night after I hung up, I sat on my kitchen floor and cried for about 20 minutes. Not because I thought I had made the wrong choice, because it was exhausting to always feel like my choices were up for family review. Every single one. Even the ones that were supposed to be mine. Daniel held me that night. He did not try to fix it or reframe it or tell me it would all work out. He just sat with me on the kitchen floor and said I was allowed to be tired. That was the moment I knew I was marrying exactly the right person. We moved forward. The next 6 months were a mix of beautiful planning and quiet tension. There were weeks where things felt peaceful and exciting. There were weeks where my mother called 3 times, and each call added a new concern, a new revision, a new voice from someone in the extended family who had an opinion about something. My Aunt Carol felt the dinner should start earlier. A cousin twice removed felt the seating arrangement put them too far from the main table. My mother's friend, who was invited as a courtesy, had dietary requirements that had not been communicated and now needed a special menu. I handled all of it. I always handled all of it. Daniel's family, by contrast, sent a single email to ask if there was anything they could do to help. Rosalind made a call to offer to take care of the wedding weekend accommodation logistics for their side. Thomas showed up one Saturday and helped Daniel and his brother Ethan move furniture around in our apartment to make room for the wedding gift boxes we were starting to collect. They contributed without demanding credit. They helped without taking over. The contrast was so clear that I started to feel embarrassed about it, even though it was not my fault. About 4 months before the wedding, something happened that I still struggle to talk about without feeling that knot in my chest. My parents sat me down for what my mother called a family conversation. This happened at their house on a Sunday afternoon. Daniel had been invited, but I had gone alone because the way my mother phrased the invitation made me think it was a family matter. Marcus and Claire were both there, which I should have taken as a warning sign. My mother started by saying they had been doing some thinking about the wedding, and they had some concerns they wanted to share. My father said the venue was very expensive, and that he and my mother had been talking, and they felt the money could be better used. I told them the venue was already paid for. We had made our choices, we had signed contracts, and we had budgeted for it. My mother then said that they felt the wedding had become too much about Daniel's side of the family. I asked her what she meant. She said that Daniel's family was very involved and very present, and that she felt my family was being pushed to the edges. She said she wanted a bigger role in the ceremony. She said my father should give a speech. She said Claire should be given a role in the bridal party, perhaps as a late addition. She said that if the seating arrangement put Daniel's family closer to the main table than her side, she would feel disrespected. I sat with all of that for a moment. Then I said, very calmly, that this was my wedding, that Daniel and I had planned it together, that Daniel's family was involved because they asked to help and offered support without conditions, that the seating chart was organized around relationships and logistics, not hierarchy, and that adding Claire to the bridal party 4 months before the wedding, after the dresses had been chosen and the arrangements had been made, was not something I was willing to do. My father said I was being selfish. That word hit me in a very specific place, the place where every daughter keeps the score she tries not to keep. Claire said nothing, she just looked at her hands. Marcus told my father that I had a point, which surprised me, and which my father immediately dismissed. I drove home that afternoon feeling like something had shifted permanently. Not cracked, not broken, just shifted. Like a weight I had been carrying had moved from one shoulder to the other, and I was suddenly aware of exactly how long I had been holding it. I told Daniel everything. He listened. He asked me what I wanted to do, not what I thought I should do, what I wanted. That question almost broke me open because it was so simple and so rare. I told him I wanted to have the wedding we planned, and not let my family's need for control take that from us. He said that was exactly what we were going to do. The weeks leading up to the wedding were manageable on the surface, but emotionally expensive underneath. My mother had gone somewhat quiet, which was never actually a sign of peace with her. It was a sign that she was managing something privately that would eventually come out in another form. I noticed her quietness and chose, unwisely in hindsight, to interpret it as acceptance. 2 weeks before the wedding, Claire called me. She called on a Tuesday evening and the conversation started normally enough. She asked how preparations were going. She asked about the weather forecast for the weekend. She asked whether I was nervous. And then, after about 10 minutes of small talk that felt like scaffolding, she said, "Mom and Dad are planning something for your wedding. I thought you should know." My stomach went very still. I asked her what she meant. She said she did not know all the details. She said she had overheard a phone call and caught pieces of a conversation. She said it involved my mother's friend who organized community events and something about a tribute or a presentation, and that my father was definitely planning to give a speech whether I had approved it or not. I asked Claire why she was telling me. She paused for a long time, then she said, "Because I know what it feels like when they do this, and because it is your wedding." That was one of the most honest things my sister had ever said to me. I thanked her. We stayed on the phone for another few minutes in an awkward, unfamiliar kind of warmth. Then we said goodbye, and I sat very still in my living room for a long time. I told Daniel that night. He wanted to call my parents immediately. I asked him not to. I told him I did not want a confrontation 2 weeks before our wedding. I did not want that energy in the room before we even walked down the aisle. I told him I would handle it my way. He trusted me. That was everything. I did 2 things in the days that followed. First, I called our venue coordinator, a steady and professional woman named Grace, and I told her that my parents or anyone acting on their behalf were not to have access to the reception program, the speaker schedule, the microphone, or any of the ceremony or reception staff without my direct approval. I explained the situation briefly, and she understood immediately. She had seen it before, she told me. She would handle it. Second, I wrote a letter to my parents. Not an email. A physical letter on paper, handwritten. I told them I knew they were planning something for the wedding that they had not discussed with me. I told them that I had worked very hard and planned very carefully for this day. I told them I was asking them, clearly and directly, to respect the program we had arranged. I told them that if they chose to create a scene or disrupt the ceremony or reception, I would remember it, not as a threat, as a fact. I sealed the envelope and hand-delivered it to their mailbox without knocking on the door. My mother called the next morning. Her voice was controlled and cold in the way it got when she felt cornered. She told me the letter was hurtful. She told me she could not believe I was accusing them of wanting to ruin my wedding. She told me they were only trying to make sure my side of the family felt represented. She told me my father had worked hard on his speech. I told her I heard her. I told her I was not trying to hurt anyone. I was asking them to respect our plans. She said she hoped I would think about the message I was sending to the family. I told her I loved her, and I would see her at the rehearsal dinner. The rehearsal dinner was held at a restaurant Daniel's family chose and helped coordinate. It was warm and full of laughter and stories. Daniel's side filled the room with energy that was completely genuine. My parents sat at their table and were pleasant in the surface way they had perfected over decades. My mother complimented the restaurant. My father shook Thomas's hand. They smiled in the right places. I watched them and felt that particular kind of tiredness that comes from always having to translate someone else's performance into something you can live with. That night I went home and slept surprisingly well. I think I had accepted something. Whatever was going to happen at the wedding was going to happen. I had done what I could to prevent it. I had put safeguards in place. And I had decided that whatever came, I was not going to spend my wedding day bracing for impact. I was going to be present. I was going to be there, fully there, with Daniel. And if something went wrong, I was going to deal with it from a place of clarity rather than from a place of fear. The wedding morning was everything. I got ready with Vera, Patricia, and Nadia in a suite at the estate. There was champagne and laughter, and Patricia told a story about Daniel as a teenager that made all of us cry from laughing. Nadia did my hair because she had been doing my hair since we were 12, and it was a comfort neither of us had to explain. Vera helped me into my dress and then just stood back and looked at me for a long moment and said, "Emily, you are exactly where you are supposed to be." I believed her. The ceremony was held in the garden. 300 people sat in white chairs with wildflower arrangements along the aisle. The weather was everything we had hoped for, warm but not hot, with a soft breeze that moved through the trees at the edge of the property. Daniel stood at the end of that aisle, and when I started walking toward him, I stopped thinking about anything else. The crowd, my parents, the letter, the phone calls, all of it just fell away. There was only the green of the garden and the man at the end of the aisle, and the feeling that I had built something real, and it was finally here. We exchanged vows we had written ourselves. Daniel's made me laugh and then cry within the same breath. Mine made him press his lips together the way he did when he was trying not to show he was emotional. The officiant, a kind woman named Helen, who Daniel and I had known for years through a mutual community connection, pronounced us married, and the whole garden erupted in the kind of applause that you feel in your chest. The cocktail hour after the ceremony was when I first noticed something was wrong. I was moving through the garden greeting guests when I saw my mother in what appeared to be a focused conversation with someone I did not recognize. A woman with a tablet and a small speaker. My mother was pointing toward the reception hall and nodding with the specific authority she used when she had decided something and was communicating that decision to someone who was supposed to execute it. I excused myself from the group I was with and went to find Grace, our venue coordinator. Grace met me near the entrance to the hall. Her expression told me everything before she said a word. She said my mother had approached 2 members of the catering staff during the cocktail hour and asked them to move 3 tables near the front of the reception to different positions. She said the woman with the tablet had introduced herself as a family friend who was going to be presenting a slideshow, and she had asked about connecting a device to the hall's AV system. Grace had intercepted both situations, she said. Nothing had been changed. No device had been connected, but she wanted me to know. I stood there for a moment. I asked Grace whether the AV system was locked down. She said it was. I asked whether my father had made any requests about the speaker's schedule. She said he had approached her assistant earlier in the day and asked where in the program the father of the bride's speech would be. Her assistant had told him that the program was set and that she would need to check with the couple. He had not pushed further, but he had not seemed happy. I thanked Grace and walked back to my reception. I found Daniel near the bar and told him quietly what Grace had told me. His jaw tightened slightly, which was the most outward sign of anger Daniel ever showed. He asked me what I wanted to do. I told him to stay present and let me handle it if something happened. He nodded once and then turned to me and straightened the collar of my dress and said, "Nothing is ruining this." I believed him. The reception began beautifully. The tables were exactly where we had placed them on the original floor plan. Daniel's family was seated in a cluster near our table, warm and loud and completely themselves. My family's table was across from them, close enough, respectful. My parents sat down, and my mother surveyed the room in that careful way she had, cataloging every detail, every placement, every signal about where she ranked in the architecture of the evening. The dinner was excellent, the speeches were beautiful. Vera went first and made everyone cry. Patricia followed and was funny and real and said things about Daniel and me that felt like they had come from someone who had known us for decades. Ethan gave a toast that was short and heartfelt. Daniel's father Thomas stood up and spoke quietly for 3 minutes that felt like a blessing rather than a performance. After each speech, I glanced at my parents' table. My mother was watching with an expression I knew well. It was the expression of someone who has been waiting for their turn and is growing less patient with each passing moment. My father sat very straight in his chair. The program moved into its next section. Music changed. The first dance was announced. Daniel and I moved to the floor and the whole room gathered around us and I lost myself in it completely. For those minutes, there was nothing else. Just the song we had chosen and Daniel's hand at my back and the feeling of having made it. Then the dancing opened to the guests. About 40 minutes into the open dancing, I was at our table catching my breath and talking to Nadia when I noticed my father had stood up from his table. He was moving toward the stage area where the DJ's setup was. He was not walking casually. He was walking with purpose, the way he walked when he had already decided something. I stood up. Nadia saw my face and said, "Do you need me?" I said yes. I told her to go find Grace and to tell Grace my father was heading toward the stage. I moved across the room. By the time I reached the stage area, my father had already spoken to someone near the DJ setup. I could see the DJ looking uncertain, glancing between my father and the tablet in front of him. My father was holding a folded set of papers. His speech. He turned and saw me coming and he straightened up. He said, "Emily, I want to give a few words for your guests. I have prepared remarks." I looked at him for a long moment. I thought about all the times I had swallowed what I needed to say. All the times I had smiled through something that hurt. All the times I had made myself smaller so that someone else could feel larger. I thought about the letter I had sent, and the phone call, and the rehearsal dinner, and 29 years of being the one who held everything together without ever being held in return. Grace appeared beside me. The DJ had not made any changes to the setup. The microphone was still in its stand on the stage, exactly where it had been for the planned portions of the evening. My father looked at Grace and then back at me. He said, "I just want 5 minutes." I said, "Dad, this is not the time." He said, "I am your father." I said, "I know, and I love you, but this is my wedding and Daniel's wedding and we planned a program and you are not in it. Not tonight." His face went through several things very quickly. Surprise, indignation, something that looked, briefly, like hurt, and then the expression he retreated to when he felt challenged, cool and controlled and slightly contemptuous. He said, "You are going to regret this." He said it quietly so that nobody around us could hear, but I heard it. And something in me, some very old part of me that had spent a lifetime managing his emotional temperature, just let go. He turned and walked back toward his table. I stood there for a second. I could hear the music. I could hear 300 people laughing and talking and celebrating. I could feel the warmth of the room and the weight of the evening and the specific exhaustion of having just done something I had been afraid to do my whole life. And then I made a decision. I turned to Grace and I asked her to bring me the microphone. She looked at me for one careful second and then she nodded and reached for it. I walked to the center of the reception floor. The DJ saw me and faded the music down. 300 people turned and looked at me. My mother, across the room, went very still. My father, who had just sat back down, looked up. I held the microphone and I breathed. And then I spoke. I said, "I want to take a moment to thank some people. I know the toasts are done, and I know you all want to dance, so I will keep this short and I will keep it honest." A gentle laugh moved through the room. I said, "I want to thank Daniel's family. Rosalind and Thomas, from the first night I sat at your dinner table, you made me feel like I already belonged. You helped plan this wedding with open hands and open hearts and without wanting anything in return except to see your son happy. I have never taken that for granted and I never will." The applause from Daniel's family was warm and immediate. I said, "I want to thank Vera, Patricia, and Nadia, who have spent the last 18 months fielding my late-night calls, my second-guessing, my overplanning, and my completely unreasonable feelings about centerpieces. You three are the reason this day felt safe." More laughter, more applause. Then I paused. I sigh. I also want to say something to my own family. And I want to say it here, in this room, with everyone I love as a witness, because I have spent a long time saying these things privately, and I think it is time to say them out loud. The room was very quiet now. I said, "Mom and Dad, I love you. I want to believe that everything you have done in the planning of this wedding came from a place of love, even when it did not feel that way. I want to believe that, and maybe it is true. But I also need you to hear me say, in front of all these people who know me, that this was my day, mine and Daniel's. We planned it together. We chose everything together. And the one thing I needed from you, more than help with any detail, more than any contribution you could have made, was for you to let it be ours. Nobody moved. I said, I am not saying this to cause pain. I am saying it because I am 30 years old, standing in my wedding dress, having just stopped my father from taking the microphone to give a speech I explicitly asked him not to give. And I realized that if I walk off this stage without saying something honest, I will spend the rest of my marriage carrying the same weight I have carried my whole life. And I am not willing to do that anymore. I looked at Daniel across the room. He was standing very still. His eyes were full. He nodded at me, slow and sure. I said to everyone else in this room, thank you for being here. Thank you for witnessing this. Dance with us. Eat the cake. Tell someone you love them before you leave. That is all I have, thank you. I handed the microphone back to Grace and walked off the stage. The room stayed quiet for about 4 full seconds. And then the applause started. It built slowly and then became something large and sustained. Daniel was across the room in about 3 steps. He put both arms around me and held me, and I felt, for the first time in as long as I could remember, completely and entirely light. I could hear my mother crying somewhere behind me, not the polite kind, the kind that comes from somewhere real. My father did not applaud. He sat at his table and stared at the tablecloth. The rest of the evening was extraordinary, the kind of extraordinary that only happens when something true has been said and everyone in the room knows it. People danced harder. Conversations ran deeper. 3 different guests came to find me during the evening and quietly said things to me. Things like, I needed to see that, and you are braver than you know, and I have been in that room my whole life and nobody ever said it out loud. Claire found me near the end of the night. She hugged me very tightly and said nothing for a long moment. Then she said, I am sorry I did not do that sooner. I told her she had done something when it mattered. She had called me and told me. That counted. My parents left before the cake was cut. I did not go after them. In the days that followed the wedding, Daniel and I were in that particular honeymoon fog that makes the world feel softened and bright. We spent a week at a rented house near the coast, just the 2 of us, and we talked about everything and nothing in the way that 2 people do when they finally have space to exhale. But my phone was not entirely quiet. My mother texted on the 2nd day. The message was long and it moved through several emotional registers. It started with hurt. It said she could not believe I would say those things in public. It said I had humiliated my father in front of 300 people. It said she had raised me to have more grace than that. Then it moved into something that sounded almost like explanation. It said they had only wanted to feel included. It said they had felt sidelined by Daniel's family. It said my father's speech was meant to honor me, not take anything away. Then it ended with the line my mother always used when she was trying to close a wound she had not actually looked at yet. It said, I hope we can move forward from this and focus on what matters. I read the message twice. I put my phone down. I picked up my coffee and looked out at the water. Daniel asked me what it said. I read it to him. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, what do you want to do? I told him I wanted to wait until I was ready and then respond honestly. Not harshly, but honestly. I did not respond that day, or the next. On the 4th day, my father called. I let it go to voicemail. His message was short. His voice was controlled but had a roughness underneath it that I recognized. He said he would like to speak with me when I was ready. He said he was sorry if things had escalated. He said he loved me. That word sat with me. Loved. I believed he meant it. But I also knew that love without accountability is just affection that has not been tested yet. My brother Marcus called on day 5. His message was different from what I expected. He said, I know you do not need me to weigh in, but for what it is worth, you were right. GHT, you have been right for a long time, and I should have said so more often. Call me when you get back, I miss you. I cried after that one. We returned from the honeymoon and I gave myself 3 more days before I arranged a meeting with my parents. Not at their house, at a coffee shop, public and neutral. Daniel offered to come. I said I wanted to go alone, and then I said, actually, yes, come with me. I do not want to do this one alone. That was its own kind of growing. The meeting was hard. My mother arrived looking tired in a way that age had nothing to do with. My father sat down and folded his hands on the table and looked like a man waiting for a verdict. I had thought about what I wanted to say, and I had written some notes in my journal, not to read from but to think through. I told them I was not there to relitigate the wedding or to catalog every hurt feeling. I told them I had said what I said at the reception because I had run out of private ways to communicate something that had not been heard. I told them that I loved them and that I wanted a relationship with them and that I wanted them to know Daniel and to know our life. But I also told them that the relationship could not continue in the same pattern it had followed for my entire life. The pattern where my needs came last. The pattern where my choices were subject to family review. The pattern where keeping the peace meant I was always the one making the peace while everyone else created the conflict. My mother said she did not know I felt that way. I looked at her. I thought about the letter I had sent before the wedding, about the phone calls, about the family meeting 4 months before the wedding where I had sat across from all of them and told them directly that I needed this to be my choice, about 29 years of smaller moments. I said, "Mom, I think you knew. I think you just hoped I would keep managing it." She looked down at her hands. My father said he had not meant to take anything from me. He said he had wanted to give me something. He said the speech was meant to tell people how proud he was. He said he had written it for weeks. I told him I believed that. I told him I was sorry I had not found a way to give him that moment that did not require me to surrender control of my own wedding to do it. I told him that if he had come to me months earlier and said simply, "Emily, I want to be part of this," I would have found a place. But instead of asking, he had decided. And that difference had cost something between us. He nodded slowly, just once, but it was real. My mother asked if we could try to move forward. I said yes, but I told her moving forward had to mean something different than it had before. It could not mean going back to where we were. It had to mean building something new. Something where I was allowed to have a boundary and the boundary was respected. Something where my life choices did not need to be passed through a family filter to be valid. Something where love was not used as leverage. She said she would try. My father said the same. I do not know how much of it will stick. I know these things are slow. I know that patterns built over decades do not dissolve in one coffee shop conversation. But I also know that something changed that day, the day I picked up the microphone. Not just for me, for all of us. Daniel and I have been married for just over a year now. Our home is the kind of place I always wanted to build. Warm, full of small rituals, anchored by a relationship that does not require either of us to disappear in order to function. Rosalind comes for dinner sometimes and stays too long in the best way. Thomas sends me articles he thinks I will find interesting, which I always do. Ethan and Patricia became some of our closest friends. Our home is full. My parents come for Sunday dinners occasionally. It is still imperfect. My mother still has opinions. My father still defaults to authority when he feels uncertain. But there is something different now. A line that we both know exists. A boundary that was named in public and that cannot be unnamed. Claire and I have grown closer in the past year than we ever were growing up. That phone call she made 2 weeks before the wedding cracked something open between us that had been sealed for a long time. We meet for coffee most weeks now. She is funnier than I ever gave her credit for. She is also braver than she knows. Marcus called a month after the wedding to have a long conversation that we had both been avoiding for years. He talked about the family dynamic with more honesty than I had ever heard from him. He said he knew he had gotten more space in the family and that he had not always used it well. I told him knowing was a start. He said he wanted to do better. I believe him. I think about the microphone moment a lot, not with regret and not with triumph either. I think about it the way you think about a door you finally opened after standing in FR. Onto it for a very long time. The room on the other side was not perfect, but the air was real. That is what I wanted. Not a perfect family, not a perfect story, just the ability to breathe honestly in the spaces that belong to me. I am Emily, and I finally took up the space I was always allowed to have. If Emily's story brought something up for you, I would love to know what it was. Have you ever been at a table where your voice was the one that never got scheduled? Have you ever stood in the middle of your own moment and realized you were managing someone else's feelings about it? Drop it in the comments, whatever it is. even just a word. Because one of the things Emily's story teaches is that naming something out loud, even quietly, is the beginning of not carrying it alone. If this story stayed with you, share it with someone who needs to hear it. And if you are here for Emily's next chapter, welcome. She is not done, not even close.